In this short series, we're going to learn how to script and utilize player health in your own Horizon world. Stick around. Hi guys, my name is Tony and welcome back to Jackal Dude Gaming. Here, I like to have fun in VR, but I love helping you have fun there too. In this series, we're utilizing player health in Horizon Worlds because you can use it in PvP games, RPG games, solo adventures, and in this first episode, we're going to learn how to use player persistent variables to set up a player health pool, how to set a value to that health pool, and how to take away from that health pool and make something happen if our health reaches 0. Now the idea for this tutorial actually came from a subscriber, so if you have something you want to learn how to script in Horizon Worlds, let me know in the comments below and I might make a tutorial on it. And remember, if this video was helpful at all, give it a thumbs up and think about subscribing and clicking the bell notification so you know when the next one goes up. Now there's a lot to do today, so let's get started. Okay, so we've loaded up a new blank world so we can start completely from scratch. The first thing you're going to want to do is set a player persistent variable. I'll show you how to do that real fast. So let's go into build mode by pressing down on our right thumbstick. Now that we're in build mode, we're going to hit the menu button on our left controller. That brings up this kind of control menu. We are going to go over to the settings icon. In the settings icon on the top right, you're going to see player. Once you hit player, you can see now we can set up our persistent player variables. Now these are going to be different than the variables we use in scripts because these will be independent per player who comes into your world. So let's set our variable to health. So health is something we're going to want to track on a person by person basis. That's why we're making it a persistent player variable. Okay, now that that's done, we're going to grab a quick shape, literally just any object. I'm going to grab this sphere right here. The reason we're grabbing just a random shape is because whenever you use scripts in Horizon Worlds, they have to be attached to some object. Later on in this series, we're going to make health bars. So eventually, we'll attach our script to our health bar. But for now, because I really just want to get the concept of player health across, we'll end up attaching it to this sphere. But so let's just bring that out so that's ready to do that when we decide to do that. Next, let's go grab our script block and start on this script. We're going to hold our script with the index and press up to get its properties. And there is the command prompt. And drag that over here. Alright, so by default, when you set a player persistent variable, it's always a number value, and by default, I believe it's 0. We don't want our health to be 0 when we start the game, so right when a player enters the world, let's set their health to a number. We can do that by finding the event over here of when player enters world. We'll drag that over to our command prompt, plop it there. So we have when world is entered by player. Now we need to set their persistent player variable to a number. We can find that over in the values tab. And here, right here, the second option, set player persistent variable to. We'll take that and put that under this prompt. Now, you can see it says change me. If you have made a bunch of player persistent variables, they'll all pop up in this drop menu. So now you can see the health we just made is right here. Now what number value do we want to set this health to when the player enters the world? You can set this to whatever you like. I'm going to be simple for now and just set it to 3, just so it's something. Now we have to set who we want their player persistent variable to be set to 3, and we want the player who just entered the world, so we can actually take this player pill, reference it right here. Blam. Now, see that trick we just did by taking the player pill and popping it there? That is only going to work under this line of code. So to be able to reference this player in other parts of the script, we need to set it into a player variable. So we're going to go make a variable by hitting the variables tab over here and clicking new variable. We're just going to name this one player 1. And under type, we'll set that to a player type. So then we can go over to our values tab again, set to, we're setting everything up when we enter the world. We want to set what player 1 is, and we're going to set it to the value of the player who just entered the world. Now, let me start by saying that the way we have this set up is really only good for a single player game. The reason is, if I entered the world, this script will basically set me to player 1. But if anyone enters the world after me, it is going to then set them to player 1. Eventually, later on in the series, I want to come up with a better way to assign different health values and different player variables to different players, but for now we're going to assume you're making a one-player game that needs a health pool. So this will work for now. So when we're playing our game with our health of 3 and we're taking damage or we're maybe gaining more health, we want to be able to check that health. The way we're going to constantly check that health is using a loop. Now the way we're going to make a loop here in Horizon World is using an events. Events are great ways for scripts to communicate with other scripts, as well as communicating with themselves. I'll show you what I mean. So we'll start by going under the Events tab, going back to the top, and we're going to send event to object. And we're going to put that under the when world is entered by player, because we want this to immediately start checking our health the minute we enter the game. So with my event, we are going to make a new event, and we're going to call it HP check, because this event will constantly be checking our HP. Now we're constantly going to be checking this on this object and this script. Unfortunately, in Horizon Worlds, we cannot attach a script to a player, which is why we're going to end up attaching this script to our sphere here. Now that we enter the world, we are sending HP check to ourselves. Now we need to define what happens when we receive that event. So we will go back up to events. When event is received, we'll plop that down as the next line of code. When my event is received, we want to change that. So when HP check is received, since we made that event, it's going to show up here in the drop down. Now, what are we going to do when we receive HP check? Ideally, we want to make sure that our player's health isn't 0 or less than 0 if you took a bunch of damage at once. So the way we're going to check that is by using an if statement. We're going to take if in the control, put it under that. We want to know if the health is less than or equal to 0. So we're going to go up to our logic tab of operators. And here we're going to find the less than or equal to symbol, and we're going to pop it under condition. Now, again, we want it to be less than or equal to 0, so let's go ahead and put the number input. We're going to go over to values tab. We're going to find number input, and we're going to place that right there. So we want it, 0 is perfect. It's always going to be 0 by default. We're going to change it like we did. We could change it like we did above, but we want to know if it's less than or equal to 0. Okay, now what do we need to know is less than or equal to 0? The player's persistent variable of health. So here we can go up to the top and we can use this get player persistent variable so we can find out what number value that variable currently holds. So when we plop that down, it's going to ask get persistent variable of what? Of the health. For who? The player. Remember, we can't use the player up here. If we try that, it's going to turn blue and it's going to say we tried to attempt to access an undefined variable. So let's get rid of that. Then we'll take the variable we made of player 1 and we'll plop that there. So when we receive HP check, we are going to check if the player persistent variable of health for player 1 is less than or equal to 0. Great. What's going to happen if it is less than or equal to 0? Well, in like most games, if you die, quote unquote, you get teleported or you restart the game. So we're going to do that here where we're going to respawn our player back to their initial spawn point. If we turn around, every world you make has a spawn point already made. So for now, we're just going to use the spawn point that's already here. So if we go over to the movement tab up in our script, scroll down to player motion, we have a command here that says respawn player. That's perfect. We're going to put that under the check if we have less than or equal to 0 health. What do we want to respawn? The player that has that health. So that would be player 1. where do we want to respawn them to? Not self, we want to respawn them to the spawn point. Again, so this is how we normally do variables. If we want to reference an object outside of the object that the script is attached to, we need to make a variable for it. So let's click new variable and we'll name this spawn. We're going to set this to the type object. Most things are going to be objects. And now we have a variable of spawn. So we're going to drag that pill over and replace that self with spawn. Great. Now, the minute we come into the world, we are going to check if the health is less than or equal to 0. If it is, we are going to respawn the player at spawn. The only problem here is that we set it to 3, then we check to see if it's 0. And it's not, so nothing happens. But it doesn't check that again. It literally just checks it the instant you come in. So now we need to turn this into a loop. So how we turn events into loops. When we send an event to ourselves, when we define what happens when we receive the event, at the end of that, we need to send the event back to itself at the end of its definition. So then it keeps looping over and over in a cycle. The way we do that, we're going to go back to events. Just like we initially send it, we're going to send event to object. We don't want to put it under the if statement, so we're going to put it above. We do want the if. It's just a weird way. It won't let us like put it under the if without putting it in the if. So we're going to put it above first, and then we'll take the if statement and put that above that. Because ideally, you want to send the event at the very end of all the commands. So remember, we're going to switch this back to our HP check to self. Wonderful. Now, there's another issue. Let's say our health does equal less than or equal to 0, and it respawns the player. Technically, there's nothing here yet that will change our health back from 0. So we'll just keep spawning ourselves in a loop forever. We don't want that. So after we respawn the player to spawn, we also want to reset their health back to 3. What we can actually do is, we've already done that up here when player enters world. So we can grab that with our index trigger, drag that down underneath the respawn. And here on our pad, you can see this duplicate symbol. We're going to press right on our D-pad to duplicate it. And blam, it's right there. Again, it's using the player pill from up here. We can't do that. So we're just going to delete that and then replace that with the player variable like we've done before. Awesome. Now this script is pretty much done. Let's break it down one more time. When player enters world, we will find that player. We will take his player persistent variable of health and we will set that to 3. Then we will set that player to the variable of player 1 so we can reference it later. Now we want to check its health constantly. So we are going to send the HP check event to this scripted object. When that HP check event is received, we are going to check if the player persistent variable of health from the player 1 is less than or equal to 0. If it is, we are then going to respawn the player to the spawn point. Then immediately reset its persistent health back to 3 of the player we just respawned. Then at the end of that, we are going to send the event again to make sure that it's still not 0. So when we send this loop again to itself over and over again instantly like this, we're technically checking this like 100 times a second. So the minute your health drops down to 0, you will be spawned back to the spawn point. Sweet. Now we will close that out for now. Oh, let's also name this script. You should always get in the habit of naming your script. So we're going to name this HP control. Perfect. Let's put that over there. So now we have to attach this script to something for it to work. That's why we made our little ball here. And under the bottom of this ball's properties panels, which we accessed by clicking the index trigger and pressing up on our D-pad. At the bottom, we're going to go to attach scripts, find the one script we made. Any script you make is going to be in this dropdown, and we're going to hit HP control. Now, when we attached the script, we made the player variable spawn, but we didn't define it in the code like we did player 1. We defined player 1 in the code, so we don't have to define it now. We do have to define what spawn is. And we said that this spawn point that comes with this world is our spawn point. So we're going to put our controller in, press up to get the properties panel. And then we're going to take this reference pill for the spawn point, and we're simply going to drop it where it's asking what is the spawn variable. Bloop. And you can see that they're connected by the blue squiggly line. Now, this should work. The only thing is we have yet to make a way to make our health go less than 0. So we're going to do that now. We are going to build just a silly looking altar. So I'm going to build a quick altar. If you need a refresher on how to build in Horizon Worlds, you can check my video right up above. But I'm going to speed through this just real fast. Okay, so as you can see, I made an altar of pain. You can tell because I wrote the word pain on it. So basically, the idea is when we stick our hand inside of this tube, we are going to take damage. So we are going to make a trigger using a trigger gizmo and then writing a script for that gizmo to then take away health when a player enters that gizmo. So I'll show you what I mean. First, we're going to take a trigger from our gizmo settings menu, and we're just going to retrofit this so, oh god, we're going to retrofit this so it fits in that little tube. So we're going to access the properties panel of this thing. Boop. Now, whenever we work with triggers, the triggers can be set off when a player enters the trigger or an object. For now, we want to use players, so we're going to leave it there at players. Now we need to write a script for it, so let's go into our gizmos, grab another script block, and we are going to name it off the get-go, and we're just going to call it pain. Pain. All right. We want something to happen when a player enters this trigger or hitbox, if you will. So under events, we'll scroll down to player events when trigger is entered by a player. Blam. Now, how do we take health away? Basically, when we want to change health, we are basically resetting it using some logic. So we will go over to our values and grab the set player persistent variable to, like we did in the other script. Okay. Just like the other time, what persistent variable are we talking about? We're talking about the health persistent variable. The health of who? The player that enters this trigger. Now, what are we going to set it to? It's not going to be as simple as setting it to a straight number, so let's delete this actually. We basically are going to set it to what the health currently is minus 1. So we'll take some subtraction logic from the operators tab. There's the minus symbol. Whoa, what is that? No, we don't want that. Minus. Put that into the value. We want to subtract it by 1. So we will take another number input, plop that in the back, and subtract by 1. Now, what are we subtracting by 1? This player's current persistent variable of health. So we'll go back to the top of this and get that persistent variable so we know what we're subtracting 1 from. Put that in A, and again, just fill this out. We want to change their persistent variable. We want to change it of the player who entered the trigger. Now, this is all set up, so every time we touch our hand into the trigger, it should take 1 away from our current persistent variable. Let's do something else. Let's say we want this to play a sound too, just so we know what's happening. So we'll go grab a sound gizmo, go to sounds, and we'll just grab anything. We'll grab this angry alien sound because I think it's funny. So we're just going to put that right up here. We're going to open the properties panel and mess with these settings real fast. We don't want the play on start. We don't want the maximum distance to be that far. This basically tells you how far away people can hear it. We just want the person who's right next to it to hear it. So we'll set that down to like, yeah, that's fine. And we can preview the sound. That's hilarious. Let's drop the pitch on it so we maybe sound more human. It sounds like a dying cat, but that's fine. Okay, so we also want when trigger is entered by player for it to play that sound effect. So we'll go over to our events tab. We'll scroll down to play sound. Take that, drop it over here. Play sound on self. We don't want that because the trigger doesn't play a sound, the sound gizmo does. So just like we did before, we need to make a variable to reference an object outside of the script. So we will make a variable, create new variable, name it SFX, and then change it to type object. Perfect. We will take that and we will play the sound on the SFX when trigger is entered by player. Now we will close that out. That should be done with the pain script, and we'll place that here just for funsies. Now we're going to open up the properties panel of the trigger again. Now, just like we did with our control object over there, we need to attach the script to the trigger. We're going to do that by, again, clicking the script drop-down menu, and now you can see our second script is here, pain. And just like the other one, we want to assign the variable of SFX. That is going to be this cute alien angry one. So we'll take the reference pill of this sound gizmo and plop it in there. Okay, now everything should work. Let's go test it out. We're going to press up on our D-pad to go to preview mode. All right, now let's test to see if our pain alter works. I'm going to stick my hand in it. Okay, that played the sound effect, and hopefully it also subtracted 1 from my current player persistent variable of health. That should leave me with 2 left. I'm going to stick my hand 2 more times to see if it'll respawn me at the spawn point. 2, 3. There we go. It respawned me at the spawn point because my health went down to 0 as we are constantly checking it. Now, when it respawns me, it should have set my health back to 3. So let's do it again to see if it properly set it back to 3. 1, 2, 3. All right, there you are. We have now completely set player health and a way to take away player health. Just so you know, this actually didn't work the first time, and I thought I messed something else, but I didn't. So if it doesn't work for you, be sure to actually leave the world and come back in. We have now set player health and a death animation, basically sending you back to the spawn point. In the next video, I'd really like to either make a health bar that constantly floats above your head, or make more ways to deal damage and give health back. So let me know what you think in the comments below. If you have any questions, be sure to check back at some of the timestamps, and don't hesitate to ask me in the comments. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time.